So I am going to hand over to our lovely Katy, who will be showing us the highlights of the Dawn Chorus this year. Over to you, Katy.
Thank you, Sophie. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen with you. I'm just going to make sure that that's sharing properly, Sophie.
Perfect. Thank you.
Brilliant. So hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Katy. I obviously work at Trust. For those of you that have been following my webinars and various virtual interactions through lockdown and things like that, I've been with the Trust for around 5 years now. I'm currently the Hedgerow Heritage Project Manager, and none of you will escape a webinar, coffee morning, or any kind of interaction without me talking about hedgerows at some point. The other thing to mention is those of you that have followed the webinars is that I do have a dog that likes to chime in occasionally. And have recently adopted a second little doggo who also likes to bother me and chime in with working. So I apologise if they try and make an appearance at any point. They're currently both fast asleep and hopefully it will stay that way. So without further ado, I'll start talking about the Dawn Chorus. So thank you so much for coming and your interest in the Dawn Chorus. It really is one of nature's most fantastic spectacles, really, and what's so fantastic about it is it can be enjoyed by anyone. Let's hope that everything's there. We go. So yeah, introducing Muggins here, who is always the one who is willing to get up for work and get out and do a Dawn Chorus. And normally at this time of year I would be out and about with a group, so like on a guided walk, and we would do a Dawn Chorus walk. I've done some lovely ones up at Putnam Common in the past, but this was me last year, unable to get out because of lockdown, and so I enthusiastically volunteered to do a virtual Dawn Chorus, and some of you might have seen that recording. I mean, look at those tired eyes up in the left there, not so enthusiastic at that point, but it was an absolutely lovely morning, and I think it really demonstrated, you know, just what you can have in your garden. So we're all here for like some nice Dawn recordings. So here's a lovely one that's from this year. So yeah, I'll just play that one more time because I was talking. So that was just in a suburban area overlooking some fields. Nothing particularly special about it, but I just thought it was a really lovely one and a beautiful morning to be out and about. And I was just so pleased to be able to get out and about and enjoy the Dawn Chorus without necessarily having to be in my garden and being able to leave the house, really. So for those who haven't really tried or to enjoy the Dawn Chorus before, you might be wondering where to go. Well, if you haven't realised already, my short answer is anywhere. Anyone can enjoy it from anywhere. It's just about being able to drag yourself out of bed at the right time. And I'll go on to talk about the various times through a Dawn Chorus and what sort of things you want to hear. But that longer answer is, well, what do you want to hear when you're doing a Dawn Chorus? It is a good idea to be mindful of certain species activities. So for example, the Dartford warbler is a lovely bird to see and one that we're lucky to have throughout heathlands in Surrey, but they're not really a dawn species. I'd say that the Dartford warbler is more of my spirit animal. It's kind of a mid-morning riser, likes a fair, warm, sunny day to really be out and about and showing and singing its heart out. So if there are certain species you really want to see, it's good to be mindful of those kinds of activities and when you're likely to see them, because you might not need to get up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to see and hear them. And even if you do, you might not be able to. It's always worth being aware as well of what don't you want to hear. So you might not want to hear any traffic or people or planes, and you might want that really holistic, you know, silence and hearing the birds wake up and getting going. And it is an amazing spectacle from absolute silence virtually to them all starting to get going. So it's worth being mindful of those things. And sometimes, again, your garden might be the best place for that. Some of our nature reserves, obviously Surrey being such a busy county, you struggle to get away from the sounds of traffic at any time of day and night. And suburban or countryside gardens might be a better place to get that silence. So my advice is always to put the kettle on. Your garden is fantastic, and if you don't have a garden, even just hanging out of a window or getting over to your local green space. If you're heading off to your local green space, get that travel mug and take it with you. It's always chilly in those mornings and definitely enriches your experience. You can take a coffee out with you. And hopefully you can see up there on the right, you can get plenty of birds coming to window feeders. And on the bottom left there, that's me with my two little helpers doing a bit of bird watching and listening to birdsong, but they're definitely snoozing on the job and not quite as into it as I am. And that picture in the middle is up at Loch Leven in Scotland, watching wildfowl. So not really getting that dawn chorus experience, but another beautiful place to watch birds. So here are a few more recordings of the dawn chorus that I did from my partner's garden last year. And hopefully you'll be able to hear this. I'll just pause for a second. So this is around 4:30 in the morning. It's obviously a few things are starting to sing, but not everything has quite woken up yet. I'm just going to apologize that I am talking through it at one point. Oh. I love it when my mouse doesn't want to work.
They're definitely starting to ramp up a bit now, getting louder. We've got a robin just on our right here. Just on the right in this hawthorn bush. So, there's my car. But I don't know how well you can make it out at the moment. But just in the bush in front of us, we've got hawthorn, which is a lovely tree often found in hedgerows, and it's in full.
So hopefully you can hear there that kind of warbly, watery song. That's the robin singing. And there's also blackbird in the background, which is a beautiful song. There's also a few contact calls as well between like wrens and robins. So not lots of things singing yet, but the woodland was definitely starting to wake up. So this one is just a little bit later on. This is around 5:30. Oh. A few more things singing now as it's getting a bit later. With the washing line for all of you. So hopefully you can hear there's a few more things starting to sing there, and also more than one individual. So wrens have joined in, but I can hear them in some closer in, some further out. So just more and more starting to wake up. This one's around 6 o'clock in the morning now. We've got coal tit and great tit added in there. Choo 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 choo, coal tit. The one that sounds like a car horn in the background is great tit. I'll just play that one more time for people because it's quite a nice one. There's a few more species there. There's blackbirds singing, as well as robins and wrens and coal tits and great tits and probably blue tits as well. Listen out for that choo-choo, choo-choo, choo-choo. And that's really that coal tit coming in. It's one of my favorite birds and one of the favorite bird songs. And then the great tit sounds like a car alarm to me. Also described as sounding like a squeaky bicycle sometimes as well. That they are there to be heard. Car alarm. So there you go. There's a few recordings from my garden or my partner's garden at various times, and the different kinds of things that you can hear at different times during the morning. And so it's not about, you're not going to get the most sounds from being there first thing, you know, with, you know, up in the pitch black, but it is a really incredible thing to hear it getting going, just a few things singing, and then them really starting to get going and competing in the woodland or garden or whatever space you're in. So I've talked a lot about different bird song, and for some of you, you might be wondering how you're going to identify what you're hearing. Some of you might be complete beginners, some of you might be amateurs and building your knowledge, some of you may well be experts already, so completely ignore me, that's fine. I like to describe myself as an enthusiastic amateur that's always learning. And I was always told that the easiest way to learn birdsong is to find the bird, watch the bird and listen to it sing and absorb it that way, which is very helpful if you have binoculars, but not always possible. But it is a really good way to do it if you can. Apps and the internet are really helpful as well. And they have some fantastic stuff on the internet now, including various songs, because many birds have many different bits of song and types of song, but also contact calls, alarm calls, and things like that. But for me, the number one way of doing it is to go out with someone who is more experienced than you and get them to help you and teach you and just absorb from them and absorb their passion as well, which is always what I did. And that's when I learned the most. So I've just mentioned there about the difference between calls and songs, that birds make many sounds just to make it difficult for all of us. And songs are different from their calls, you know, alarm calls or contact calls. I've just got a video for you here of when I was out on a walk around dawn, and it's lovely nuthatch family, and they're in the trees. The parents are with the fledged chicks from the nest, and they're just constantly chattering and just constantly checking in with each other. And probably the young are just saying, feed me, feed me. I wanted that caterpillar. Mum, mum, mum. There's a lot of that. But actually, when it's birds, it sounds a lot more pretty. So yeah, I'll just play that one more time for people because I think it's lovely. I always think that nuthatches have that really like almost stereotypical cartoon tweet, 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 like you see birds having on TV programs. But I saw these ones when I was just out on a walk around dawn. So it's not that you have to find a place to sit and just wait. You know, by going for a walk as well, you're going to increase what you see and what you hear. Even if it's the same species of bird, you're going to hear more numbers of the same ones, but you're also really likely to hear different types of things because you might be walking in and out of different habitat types, edge habitat types as well, where two different habitats are meeting each other, which is a really good place to see and watch birds. So you just never know what you're going to do. So put that coffee or a tea in a takeaway mug and get walking. You'll also stay warmer because it is always cold, especially this year. So I thought I'd just play 5 common species that you can listen out for in your gardens. So I apologize if, you know, there are a lot of very experienced bird watchers on here, but these 5 I thought are just, you know, they're not the 5, but they're 5 common species that you can hear in your garden. They've all got quite different calls, except the robin and the wren, I would say. And the best way, if you want to start learning bird calls, as well as just enjoying the dawn chorus, is just to build up with a few different species. Because when you first start trying to identify birdsong, they're all going to sound exactly the same. They did for me anyway. And it's just too much noise, and it's very difficult to differentiate between the different calls. But if you can start getting your ear in and even just being able to identify a couple, you'll know that when you hear something new, it's not the one you know, and you start to pick up those differences in what you're hearing. And it's just really useful to be able to start building up your bird song. So we'll start with the robin. got that quite watery warble. I always think that they're sort of gargling underwater when they sing, robins. And that can also be another useful way of remembering birdsong, by just like remembering it with something. So I always imagine robins singing underwater, and that's how I remembered it when I first started out. So we'll move on to the wren. And when I first started learning wren, I just thought it sounded like a robin on speed, basically, with a trill at the end. But see what you guys think. If my cursor wants to come back to me. There it is. It's a bit quieter, that one, but hopefully you can hear it. It's a little bit quiet, that one, for people, but we'll move on to blackbird. Hopefully you got some of the trills there from the wren. This is the song that I associate with spring and summer evenings, with blackbirds sat on the top of your fence or on a chimney pot, just singing their hearts out into the dusk. Okay, and then we'll go on to the car alarm, squeaky bike, great tit. So this one's interesting because the dominant song in the recording isn't the squeaky bike car alarm one. And great tits have an incredible, let's call it, vocal range, and have lots of different songs. And when I was learning birdsong, when I first worked at the RSPB, me and some of the other people had a rule of thumb that if you didn't know what something was in a woodland, it was probably a great tit, because they just have such a variety. But you can hear the kind of car alarm, squeaky bicycle song in the background from another bird. So I'll just play it for a little bit longer and you can just hear a bit of the variety that they can provide. Okay, so that's great tit. I'm hoping this is long enough for everyone and you're getting a flavour for it. It's always a bit funny doing these webinars where you're just like, okay, and now we'll move on to the next one without much feedback from an audience. So this one I thought I'd include is house sparrows. So they were a very, very numerous species that have suffered a really big decline in recent decades. But they were very much the bird of my childhood. They were always in hedgerows and on my garden lawn. I used to love watching them feed fledglings in the morning. And I am lucky enough now that I live somewhere where I get lots of house sparrows around. And if you hear a lot of noise and kerfuffle coming from a hedgerow in an urban or suburban area, it's quite likely to be house sparrows. So whether you're lucky enough to have them in your garden or you just get to hear them in green spaces, parks, whatever, often in hedgerows. They're very different from the other ones we've listened to. And this is actually apparently the male house sparrow's song, which can sound very similar to a call from other birds. Okay, there's a little bit of house sparrow. So there's just 5 species They all sound reasonably different, except the robin and the wren, which I included so that you've got two that are a little bit similar and you can start to differentiate between them. But there's loads of good apps online if you want to listen to birdsong. The RSPB do some really good pages on different birds, but there's loads of different stuff out there as well. And also joining one of our in-person walks in the future as well is a great way to do it. So, many of you may want to be trying to attract more birds to your garden to increase your dawn chorus experience as well as your rest of the day garden experience too. And so I am here to say that your garden doesn't need to be large. I know that a lot of the recordings were done in my partner's garden, who has a very lovely large woodland setting garden, which is fantastic, but it doesn't need to be perfect either. You know, these gardens are beautiful. I definitely aspire to have a beautiful brick path in my garden one day, but it doesn't need to be perfect. There's lots of little things you can do in small gardens, in medium-sized gardens, or areas where you wouldn't necessarily think you could attract lots of wildlife. There's loads of things you can do to attract them. So just to hammer home that point, this is my garden and I get lots of birds in here. So I only recently moved in. I am in the process of making lots of changes, but even just a few things that I've done already are attracting lots more birds to the area. So here are some of the features that I've put in. So on the far left there, you'll see I've put a pond in. The number one thing you can do is have a water source. So there was an old water feature, which you can see there, which I've converted into a pond, which was a very quick fix. And by putting that pond in, even a raised pond that's actually reasonably small has made such a big difference. I have daily house sparrows and starlings coming to this pond, balancing on the plants so that they can get a drink. I've put oxygenating plants in the water, as well as flowering plants that are good for bees and pollinators in as well. So not only am I providing a water source for things to drink, I'm also providing a nectar and food source for the food species of all of the birds. And always by attracting those that are at the bottom of the food chain, like all of your invertebrates and insects, moths, butterflies, whatever, that is the food source for so much. So if you can get it right for invertebrates at the bottom of the food chain, you're going to get it right for everything else going up as well. I have something akin to a hedgerow in my garden. That's what I like to say anyway. So this is just kind of an ornamental holly species, but has got honeysuckle planted in it as well. So although it's not a particularly fantastic hedge by hedgerow standards, it is filling a lot of the niches for hedgerows. It's providing shelter, it's providing nesting opportunities, lots of homes for invertebrates again, which will in turn attract lots of birds and other wildlife. And the honeysuckle will provide a nectar source for things in the spring and the summer as well. And not just a nectar source and food source for invertebrates, but small mammals will eat the flowers as well as birds and other species as well. So even though it's not a perfect hedge with my hedgerow hat on, it's still able to fill a lot of the niche. So anything you can do can be helpful. It doesn't need to be perfect. I grow a lot of fruit and vegetables. So here I've repurposed an old trough that couldn't be used anymore, and I am growing raspberries, as well as planted some companion plants and climbing plants to provide more cover and interest in the garden. I only did that this year, so it's looking a bit sorry for itself at the moment, and the raspberries don't know what's happened to them. They've been uprooted from one place to another, but hopefully it will come good. And then in the top right, I've just planted lots of trailing plants that are good for bees and butterflies as well. And in the top right, you can see that there's a bug hotel, but there's many different types of bug hotel. And that's another really quick fix you can do for attracting lots of different invertebrates, which will in turn attract more birds and other wildlife to your garden. So even in a small garden, you can do lots of different little things to attract different species to your garden. So to sum that up, definitely have water, ideally not with fish in, please. Or even if you have a fish pond, maybe have another little tiny wildlife pond. Any water will help attract lots of wildlife to your garden. Having a wild patch, a little patch that you leave unmown and just to go a bit mad in your garden, which again, I think adds interest to your garden. This will be beneficial to birds as well as all other types of wildlife. bee-friendly plants and good for pollinators, considering a hedge. And the number one that I think people might go onto is bird feeders, which I'll just say a little bit more about now. Feeders are a fantastic way to attract more birds to your garden, you know, and to get quite quick results often. Sometimes it can take them up to 3 months to find the feeders, but generally it's quite a quick fix to attract more birds to your garden. However, you're also very likely to attract other creatures to your garden, whether that's squirrels, squirrels, mice, rats, or even foxes. The fattest, most smug fox I ever saw was on a nature reserve, sat underneath the bird feeders, chomping on whole suet balls. So just be mindful of whether you are willing to accommodate those species into your garden as well. Or maybe consider putting dishes on the bottom of your feeders so less falls down. You know, different things you can do. Think about what food you're going to feed so you're less likely to get these species if you don't want them. I quite like seeing the odd rat and mouse around, but I hear that's not a popular opinion. The other big thing with feeders is that they need to be cleaned regularly. You know, you think you're doing this fantastic thing, providing food for your garden birds. By bringing lots into one area, you're increasing the risk of bacteria, germs, infections, some of which can be deadly for birds. So I would recommend washing them ideally once a month, but maybe as much as once a season. So spring, autumn, winter, wash them every so often and look after your feathery friends in the garden. I've just got this great video, which is off RSPB Middleton Lakes. Others very much benefiting from the feeders as well. There must have been maybe 15, 20 rats having a wonderful time, snacking on everything the birds were leaving behind. And just in a moment, it pans up and you can see the birds also really enjoying the feeders. But you can just see how much is thrown down. So many birds are really messy eaters as well. Like I watch nuthatches on bird feeders and they just go, nope, not that seed, not that one, not that one, and throw half of it out before they find the one they actually want to eat anyway. One. And like I said, there is no way that I can do presentations these days without also mentioning hedgerows. They really are a great way to attract so much more wildlife to your garden. You know, the Anglo-Saxon word for hedgerow was hege, which meant living fence. You can get such big wildlife gains in this way. So you could replace a fence potentially and get it laid or have it nice and thick, depending on what your needs are in the garden. It's such a more beautiful thing than having a fence in a garden. And it provides so many niches and homes for wildlife, but also for their different behaviors and stages of life. So even as perching spots for birds and even butterflies, hedgerows are fantastic. So there's lots of different types of hedge you can have in your garden. And as you can see here, you know, mine isn't particularly perfect by hedgerow standards, but still able to provide lots of those gains. So just a couple of things if you were to consider having a hedgerow in your garden. Try and get a native mix of species, avoid large conifers and ornamental species like laurel as well, and plant it at the right time of year. If you want to plant a hedgerow in your garden, the best time of year is to do it in the winter, and then just think about the management that you might need to do for that hedge to really get all the benefits for you and for wildlife as well. And that's very much a whistle-stop tour on hedges. I do a whole hour's webinar on caring for hedgerows and what to consider if you want to put them in your garden, and another hour on all of the benefits of hedgerows. So there's lots more information on the website if you want to hear a little bit more about hedgerows and how to attract more wildlife to your garden with them. So we're nearly at the end of our whistle-stop tour for dawn choruses and how to attract more birds to your garden. And I just wanted to reiterate that really the dawn chorus is for everybody and you can enjoy it anywhere. So on the right there, this is me enjoying a dawn chorus and a fantastic sunrise from my first floor flat in Guildford a couple of years ago. And then the one on the left is me going for a dawn wild swim in a river on a nature reserve. So there are many, many different ways to enjoy the dawn chorus, as well as a beautiful sunrise and wildlife in general. always put the kettle on and take a cup of tea or coffee with you. And it will always, in my opinion, enrich your experience. So thank you very much for listening, and let me know if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Katy. That was absolutely brilliant. And we're lucky enough to sort of live fairly close to each other. So it's lovely to know that I can go out in the garden now and identify some of the birds, because they are so noisy in our garden. It's just crazy. It's brilliant. So we're at the question time now. If you would like to ask a question in person, please raise your virtual hand or turn your video on and wave frantically at the camera. In the meantime, we do have a couple of questions that have come in via the chat, which I will read out. The first one, someone's just asked that question as well. It's rather convenient. Which app would you recommend, please, for identifying birds or bird song? Sorry.
Oh, that's a very good question. I think the RSPB do a bird song app, and I think maybe the BTO do as well. So I would definitely recommend those two as very good sources. The BTO are a fantastic source, as are the RSPB. So those would be the two that I would recommend. If you don't want to use an app on a phone, they're websites as well. So the RSPB do great pages for all birds. So if you want to learn a little bit more about a particular bird species, you can just put RSPB blackbird, and it tells you a bit about their behavior, their movements, how many there are, and also a decent song. There are more, but then the BTO will offer more in-depth knowledge. So you might get an alarm call as well as a contact call and the song, and maybe different types of their song. So different levels.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Katy. That's a fantastic answer. Great question as well. I think I'll be downloading that after this as well. Right. So that's the first question. Are log piles good for birds? That's a great question.
Oh yeah, log piles are brilliant. So I didn't really have time to go into like every possible thing you can add to your garden to things, because I also didn't even really mention putting up a birdhouse, which is also a good in your garden. But yeah, a log pile is fantastic because it's good for so much at the bottom of the food chain. So by having a log pile, you're attracting all sorts of different invertebrates to your garden, whether it's like a simple woodlouse, or perhaps if you bury some of that dead wood as well, that's really good for stag beetles, because stag beetles can live underground for up to 7 years in their grub form, buried dead wood. So that's what they need. So that's really fantastic for them. It will also bring lots of amphibians to your garden, which will use it as shelter, but also for foraging for food, for slugs, snails, invertebrates, and things like that. I once had a frog in a log pile, which I referred to as Simba, because he would climb up into the middle of the log pile. I never saw him doing the climbing. I would just see him sat in just a little naturally formed cave in the wood pile, and would just survey his kingdom, would just sit halfway up the log pile and just watch the world go by up there. So, and of course, lots of wildlife will eat frogs and other amphibians as well. So yeah, if you really take care of the bottom of the food chain, you're really looking after those that are a bit higher up as well, including Simba the frog.
I love that. Oh, I want a Simba in my garden. Hopefully one will come to my newly built pond. Brilliant. All right, another question. Here in South London, we have found there is much less waste and fewer pigeons if you use specific food in different feeders. So for example, we have one with milled nuts, one with small suet, one with Niger seeds, one with sunflower seeds, sorry, it's difficult. I've got a light shining on my face and I'm reading the question. So when we use mixed feeds, there was a lot more waste and many more pigeons. That's interesting. And he also has asked, I have a question about bird recording, I hear, and wonder if you might be able to identify it. That's a two-parter question for you then.
So I'll start. That's great question and comment. So that's exactly the right thing to do when feeding birds in your garden. Think about what you want to attract, what you don't want to attract, and do and do it specifically. So yeah, there are lots of different types of feeders out there that can help to reduce waste, including doing things like putting those dishes on the bottom so less falls to the ground, which is really helpful. But yeah, I can't recommend using specific types of feed and specific types of feeders more, and remembering to wash them. So that's great. And the second part of the question, I'm very happy to attempt to ID what you have heard. Feel free to send a sound recording or get in touch after this.
Absolutely. Feel free to email myself at events@surreywt.org.uk or sophie.code, spelled code like toad, COAD. And Katy and I will enjoy listening to that recording, and I can learn something as well. So that's brilliant. Right, we have a few more questions. Oh gosh, lots of questions coming in now. Any recommendation for apps that record and identify bird song? Do you know if the app you recommended does that? That's
I don't know.
Brilliant idea.
I don't know for that one. I mean, that would be a great idea, but that's not something I've investigated before. So let us know how you do. I mean, have a look on the App Store. That's how I do it, trial and error and these things. But I don't know of one that does that. But, they're creating new things all the time. And I wouldn't exactly say that my tech levels are great. I spend more time getting mucking around in the garden than I do on my phone. So, but if you find it, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, the brilliant idea, because you can do it for songs now.
Yeah.
Apparently, if you're technology minded, which I'm not, apart from Zoom. I've got one compartment in my brain, and that's for Zoom. Right, we have more questions coming in. Just scroll down. Which woodland birds sing first? That's a brilliant question.
I generally think I hear robins waking up and singing first. Maybe blackbirds and wrens as well. Although I'm not a woodland specialist expert, and robins are very much a generalist, but they are everywhere. And I sometimes hear robins just singing in the middle of the night. They never seem to stop, really, especially in cities and different places. So I would say robins. I'm trying to think of another woodland one that might sing really, really early as well. No, robin would probably be my answer. Blackbirds often get going quite early on as well, and then everything else starts waking up.
Brilliant, excellent. That's a very good question. Right, great talk on another topic. Where was the wild swim spot, or is it a secret?
Well, I have many wild swim spots. I am a big fan of wild swimming, but this was along a section of the way, if that's helpful.
Lovely. Feel free to email us, and I'm sure we can give you specific directions. Right, wonderful. Lovely talk, thanks. I find that ground feeding birds, robin, dunnocks and blackbirds do a great job of eating the food the tits and the goldfinches drop. The mice don't get much of a look in. That's brilliant.
That is true. You do help out your ground feeding species by doing stuff like that. It's just for those considerations, like sometimes they don't get everything. For me, if the birds aren't quick enough, then the dogs eat everything. So I have to be mindful of that as well. But yes, whatever it is, whether it's ground feeding birds or other wildlife, everything will get hoovered up. It's just whether you want to risk attracting other things to your garden. Like I said, I'm very happy to see the odd mouse and rat, and I enjoy all the wildlife. I'm also lucky enough that I get hedgehogs in my garden, so I know everything is getting snuffled up. It's just always good considerations with bird feeders, because I don't feel like the conversation is good enough around them, where people think, oh, bird feeders are fantastic for getting wildlife into your garden. But there's just some other considerations to make. But you're absolutely right. Ground feeding birds will hoover up a lot as well.
Brilliant. That's great to know. This is a question I was pondering the other day, actually. So thank you for asking it. What range of information do birds exchange? Do we know? That's a brilliant question.
We have an idea of what birds are exchanging, but I don't think we'll ever know in any kind of real detail. I don't know if I should do the impressions. I was doing impressions to my friends the other day about like the difference between like calls and song, but bird song is a beautiful thing, but it's males attracting a mate and telling other males to stay away at all costs. So robins are hugely territorial, beautiful, warbly, gentle song, but it's incredibly violent and stay away to other males and encouraging other females in. And those contact calls are all sorts of things. I do find contact calls really interesting between birds. So like that family group of nuthatches, they'll have been exchanging all sorts of information. The chicks saying that they want more food. And I think they're pretty good at having a bit of a hierarchy where they share the food out. So somehow they know which chicks have had some and which haven't, which has to be communicated somehow. In the winter, big flocks of tits and finches will all join up and find food together. And the more senior birds or those with more knowledge will lead the group to where they've found food, where they've been to in the past, and will let others know where it is. So a lot of information is shared in various ways, and I won't pretend to be an expert on it in the slightest, but I don't doubt for a second that there's plenty we don't understand, and it's much more intricate than we necessarily give it credit for sometimes.
I love that thought. Right, we have lots and lots of questions coming in now, so I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to everyone. So if we haven't asked your question, please do email us, and I will add to Katy's massively busy to-do list, and maybe buy her a coffee as well as a bit of bribery. So that was a brilliant question. Next question is, why do sparrows shred flowers like polyanthus plants, particularly in the breeding season, even when the feeders are full? That's a great question.
It is a great question, and I don't know the answer. Apologies, but I hazard a guess that they are maybe eating some of it. Like nectar is very rich for them. They may be using some of it for their nests. I don't know the exact answer. I would say maybe they're shredding it for specific insects that are inside, or looking for the pollen, or maybe using some of it for their nest is the first thought that I would have, but I don't know the exacts on that one.
Brilliant. That's a great question. Right, we've got some brilliant advice here. Following from Katy's suggestion to follow the RSPB for birdsong, they produce an RSPB guide to birdsong by Adrian Thomas. Complete CD for $15.99. Really good guide and CD, which is really helpful to gradually build up one's knowledge, rather like learning a language. Thoroughly recommend it. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Anthony. That's just fantastic. So hopefully everyone's got a chance to write that down. It's the RSPB Guide to Birdsong by Adrian Thomas. If you wanted to look into that.
That is a great CD as well. I used to work for the RSPB, and so they kind of just give them out at conferences and you use them as coasters virtually. So yeah, it's a fantastic CD, and it used to be when I still knew where the CD player was on my car, I used to listen to it a lot.
Brilliant. And someone else suggested they use Bird Up. Have you heard of that one?
I've not heard of that one.
Oh, brilliant. Something to look at. Lots of discussion about BirdNet as well. That's pretty good. So if you want to have a look at that. And the next question is, how does the dawn chorus change during the seasons? That's a brilliant question.
It is a brilliant question. So the dawn chorus, the best time to hear it is in the spring, and I'd say late spring. So May is the best time of year to hear it, because that's when the most birds are competing for territories and looking for a mate. Once birds have mates and have nests, they quieten down quite a lot. Now, a lot of birds will maybe have multiple broods, which is why you get song all through the year. Some birds hold territory all through the year. Some species breed all through the year, which is why you see so many pigeons. Doesn't matter what year, a pigeon will give it a go. So I would say May is the time when you're going to really hear the most. And then things really do quieten down through the summer. You get some species still singing, but it gets much, much quieter. In the winter, it's virtually silent, except for robins, I would say, and maybe the odd blackbird more contact calls, because you get birds and alarm calling and things like that. Not that I would really describe that as a dawn chorus. Dawn chorus really is a spring phenomenon, and you do still get bird song and bird calls and birds waking up in the morning and singing. But for that, what we really call the dawn chorus, it's very much a spring activity. So through the other seasons, it's much more quiet, but it's just different, and it's still nice at times, but maybe not quite as rewarding as that early wake up calls in the springtime.
Brilliant, thank you. Wonderful. More discussion about BirdNet, and someone uses an app called Chirpomatic. I like the name of that. Not perfect, but useful. And it is for recording and identifying. So maybe with a few more tweaks, that'll do the dream job of identifying birdsong perfectly for you. Right, another question. I have a song thrush that for the last few weeks has been singing in the back corner of my garden at volume from dawn till dusk. Any idea why it is singing so enthusiastically at the moment? That's a lovely thing to hear.
Yeah, I would say because he's trying to attract a mate. He's probably found a decent territory, likes your garden, and just trying to get the females in and try and defend it from other males, I would say. I imagine if he was to stop singing, it may well be because he's got a mate, and you might see them starting to build a nest there.
Oh, how lovely. Oh, I hope you get a nest. Oh, wonderful. Right, distinction between songs of the house sparrow versus a Dunnock hedgerow sparrow. Oh.
Dunnocks sound completely different to sparrows. So another name for a dunnock is a hedge sparrow, but that's where the comparison ends really, because they kind of they're both little brown birds, which is the really. But I would say that a dunnock sounds more like a robin or a wren. So it's kind of really quite sped up, and it kind of goes da 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 da. So if you were to go and listen to that song, you'd hear it's quite different. Whereas the house sparrow could almost sound like constant contact calls. There's not really that long continuous song with sparrows typically. Whereas the dunnock is that really quite sped up. Sometimes I think, oh, a robin, oh, that's fast. Oh, it's a dunnock. So that's what I would compare it more to.
Brilliant, thank you. And do woodpeckers have songs?
You hear the green woodpeckers yaffle, sort of that laughing song, which can also be almost like an alarm call as well. So I don't know if you would even call it its song, but that's the one that I would associate. You get a lot of contact calls with greater spot woodpeckers. But no, to be honest, I don't exactly know. I don't think so, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some birdier people than me on this call that might say, well, actually, there is this song. But the way that great spotted woodpeckers attract a mate is by drumming. So that drumming on the wood sound, that's how they attract a mate. And they do have a contact call, which is quite distinctive, which I wouldn't be able to do a good impression for you. Go back, listen to it. And then the green woodpeckers, they don't drum. They predominantly feed on ants and things on the ground rather than insects under bark and things like that, like a greater spot. So they have that yaffle. So
Brilliant.
So it's a bit of a rambly answer.
No, it's a great answer. Wonderful.
I'll just say, Sophie, I don't know about the lesser spot. I think they drum for a mate as well, but I wouldn't know if they also have a song.
Brilliant. Thank you. Great question here. Are garden lights disturbing for wildlife? We have solar powered ones which can stay on late and night and look very pretty, but would they disturb wildlife? That's a great question.
I would say not to upset anyone about their lights, but light does disturb wildlife. Yeah, it does. I mean, solar lights generally aren't super bright, so I think you've got less issues with that. But generally, parks being lit up, big garden lights that light up all night, it does disturb wildlife. It disturbs bats and other species and various things. A lot of things that are nocturnal are so to avoid being spotted. You know, it's an adaptation for that. And so if it's then very, very light, it can disturb them. You know, there you do get birds that sing all night long in cities, and they think maybe it's because of the disruption with lights and the confusion. Not that they know exactly, and there's lots of other factors at play as well, but the short answer is, yeah, light does disturb wildlife at night.
Thank you, Katy. Right, every year we get a flock of redwings in our garden just before Christmas. They strip the trees of berries and then we don't see them again until next year. It is a great early Christmas present. Oh, how wonderful. That's absolutely brilliant.
That. Yeah, that is one of the joys of having like holly in your garden that has berries and things like that. If you're lucky enough to get a flock of redwing or even fieldfare, and they just descend on your garden, strip it bare, and then move on to the next one.
Love it. Absolutely. Keep feeding them. What a lovely Christmas present. In response to the question about apps, for your recording, apparently there is one called Warbler for use for the iPhone and Android. Haven't tried it, so don't know how good it is. Great, thank you for that pointer. And then someone has said, I have the same situation with song thrush, so-called singing morning to night. I call it discordant thrush. Brilliant. And do you have any advice for deterring predating birds from my garden? In particular, I have a jay and he visits every day and is taking nestlings and fledgling birds, in particular baby dunnocks and sparrows. Oh, that's heartbreaking.
It is always sad, but it is the natural way of things. Like, I wouldn't think of a jay as being a common garden bird. They are more of a woodland bird. And if you're attracting jays to your garden, then I think you've probably got quite a healthy ecosystem in there. It is always sad that birds get taken. I know that people have real issues with magpies, but they are a native species to the UK, filling a role. And I would say, you know, lots of us are sad to see numbers of songbirds decline. But I don't think that you can really attribute that to the predators, the native predators in this country. I'd say that cats are more of a problem, and I don't have a problem with anyone having a cat. I have a problem with jays and magpies taking birds to feed their young. You know, people often have issues with sparrowhawks as well and worry about the birds. And sparrowhawks will only come into an habitat and an area that's got a really healthy population of birds. So it's a good indication if you've got these predators like a sparrowhawk. I wouldn't say the same with magpies because, you know, they're very much a generalist and will fill niches, but I think a jay is quite unusual to be getting to your garden. I certainly don't get them in mine. So jays and sparrowhawks, I think, are more of an indication that you've got a good, healthy ecosystem. And as sad as it is, sometimes you just have to let nature take its course.
I hear you, Katy. Thank you for that. Right. We have Ross from Surrey Back Group with us. Hi, Ross. Lovely to see you here. Just to reinforce the message that artificial light at night and all sorts is bad for bats. I hear you. Absolutely. I'm going to change my lighting outside. Thank you for reinforcing that idea, because we do have bats around here and I haven't seen them for a while, so those lights are going off. Excuse me. So just a few more questions coming in. Parakeets problematic at all to other birds and nesting? That's the question.
I haven't seen it yet. So there's a lot of chat about what parakeets are doing. Obviously, they're quite a new species to this country and what kind of problems they can have. I hear some people saying that, yes, they are going to be a problem and they are causing problems. And I hear others saying, no, they're not. I am yet to personally see them causing problems. I've heard a lot of talk about them potentially filling the nest holes of woodpeckers and things like that. Although I haven't seen a noticeable decline in woodpeckers. I'm very happy for people to think differently to that. But as far as I can see, they are kind of doing their own thing. What kind of problems we could have down the line, I don't know. I don't encourage the parakeets, but I also don't discourage them. So I'm not an expert on invasive species or parakeets, but that's my take on it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Katy. I don't have any more questions at the moment. Just following on from a sort of earlier question, someone's saying we have jays and sparrowhawks in our garden in West Croydon. How wonderful. I've only had the joy of seeing a sparrowhawk once in my garden, and it was so quick, and I haven't seen it since. Rather gutting.
I had a male sparrowhawk last week with that day where it just rained all day. And he looked very forlorn in a magnolia tree, just soaked through, just not having a good time at all. And all the other nesting starlings and house sparrows in the houses were just going nuts at it. It just wanted to try and get out of the rain for a moment and was just getting no peace.
Brilliant. Oh, was that at your home, Katy?
Yeah, that was at my house.
Excellent. There is definitely one around here then. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Actually, to finish, I saw we have some red kites over our way, which are just magical. It never gets old. Every time I see them, I look at the sky like it's the first time I've seen them, and saw quite a few seagulls just circling this red kite the other day, which was very amusing, being very, very noisy and trying to ward it off something, which was quite interesting to see. Right, we have just a couple more questions or comments. Parakeets are a major problem in parts of Spain where they outcompete and sometimes kill the very rare great nocturnal bat. Oh, wow. Yes. I seem to remember David Lindo mentioning parakeets in one of his urban birds talks as well, which so if you want to sort of learn more about sort of urban birds as well, and sort of all over the world, there are his talks are recorded on our website. So do sort of go back and view them if you can. On Chobham, there are lots of ground nesting birds. There is an increase in cyclists on the common. Cycling on the common, is cycling allowed across the common? That's a good.
It's tricky with our reserves and the areas that we manage for Surrey County Council. We recommend that everybody sticks to paths all year round, whether breeding bird season or not. There is a real issue with disturbance for ground nesting birds. I certainly always keep to paths. I certainly make sure all of my dogs do, the two have now, and various things. But there is a right to roam. So it's not illegal to leave the paths. It's just really frowned upon, and we try and work with people, as well as the Thames Basin Heath wardens, which are employed by Natural England, who are out there throughout the breeding bird season, educating people and trying to encourage them to keep to the pathways and respect these birds. You know, the biggest thing and the biggest lesson is that we need to respect the wildlife that we have, value it, and work with it. And so whether it's illegal or not, it is best to paths, keep our dogs to paths and keep people to paths.
Brilliant. Thank you, Katy. Yes, our reserves, particularly so Chobham Common and the sort of Heathland sites, are fantastic locations for ground nesting birds. And actually yesterday I put online a coffee morning on the nightjars. So I imagine it's going to be quite popular. So please go to our online talks page. The talk will be given by our Director of Reserve Management, James Hurd, and it will be a fascinating sort of coffee morning with him as well. So do sign up as soon as possible, because numbers will be limited according to our Zoom contract, unfortunately. I have no more questions at the moment. So I will just thank Katy for brilliant, inspiring and educational coffee morning as always. And for those of you who asked about sort of IDing particular sounds, please do email us. I'd love to learn. Katy probably will already know it. If she doesn't, she'll love to learn as well. So please do get in touch. And thank you for joining us. And get out there in your gardens and encourage these incredible birds and everything they eat, which is very important. So lovely to see you all for the coffee morning. Thank you so much, and see you again soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye everyone.